In this video, I'm going to be philosophizing on situations. Situations concern dynamical changes within internal and or external conditions, engaging certain direct perceptions in relation to perceptions of dynamic transformations within the internal and or external environment, related to specific, distinct component parts and or processes, more unique to the defining of specific situations, meaning that situations are inherently and or intrinsically defined in terms of the distinct component parts and or processes characteristic of unique intrinsic processes and or intrinsic properties to the situation, distinct from certain existing mind-body connections, meaning that one's direct perception is more influenced, instead of the per se mind-body connections, in relation to the dynamic changes within the internal and or external characteristics one perceives in relation to the situations, often concerning distinct events within the external environment, yet influence the internal environment in relation to the external events, and tend to shape and or modify certain contingencies within one's conducts, not necessarily mind-body connections, yet certain repeated intervals of meaningful exposure to meaningful similarities across distinct situations may more likely elicit similar responses and or approaches to certain situations, more likely to reflect an individual's coping and or conducts in relation to perceptions of certain contingencies and or internal and or external conditions in response to distinct situations. Perhaps one of the most clearest examples would be if it's raining outside, one may draw from past prior existing experiences, being wet in a rainstorm, perhaps walking home and experiencing distinct changes within the internal, external conditions of the self, perceiving certain characteristics, and may plan in the future to bring an umbrella and or a raincoat to prevent certain unpleasant experiences, and or may be more tolerant of perhaps having one's own clothes, maybe even taking notice on how it weighs on one's clothing, and yet does not necessarily feel bothered, yet upon having a backpack had one's books ruined, and so maybe brings a garbage bag just to put over the backpack and does not mind necessarily the potential risk of having one's coat and or clothing rained on, with the forecast that it will most likely rain in the future, not necessarily that it is raining, yet taking a garbage bag allowances one to travel lighter and or save costs, and potentially what is to one's own unique benefit more appropriate, drawing from certain meaningful similarities, concerning the meaningful similarities within the problems associated with the distinct situations, impacting certain internal and or external conditions, with perceptions into causations on how situations will influence somebody's mind-body connections concerning distinct internal and or external characteristics in relation to one's own self-preferences, engaging dynamic responses to the situation to allowance for more optimal subjective well-being in those distinct situations, from certain past prior existing experiences meaningful to future-oriented resolutions to certain problems, engaging direct perception, from one's perception of certain contingencies more likely to provide optimal solutions one can build on from past existing experiences in relation to dynamic changes within the internal and or external environment, meaningful to improve one's subjective well-being with satisfying certain underlying psychological needs, in this case to regulate body temperature, and or also may, in the latter case, be associated with meaning in life, becoming more curious of
good to see you, buddy.
Certain distinct transformations within one's internal and or external conditions. That's all I want to say for this video. Hope you have an awesome one. Keep doing those episodes.